Thanks, Tim. So, like Tim said, my name is Alex. I've worked on several different FHIR IGs. Just by show of hands, who's ever authored a FHIR IG in the room? I just see a couple hands up. Oh, quite a few hands. And everybody in the room is familiar with a FHIR profile. I assume if you're here, you are. Yeah, I see some nods. So just a little bit about Canada. Canada is not really one health system. We've really got 13 different health systems. And they all have different jurisdictions and different specifications. We also have pan-Canadian specifications, which cover national use cases that are applicable in the different jurisdictions. And there's a lot of different IGs, as you can imagine, because of this kind of infrastructure and the way that our system is set up. So to build a pan-Canadian core, we attempted to harmonize many different IGs into a single core IG and adopt requirements from the different layers. And this alignment mattered because we wanted to have a more unified approach. We wanted to have more consistency across the different jurisdictions. And ultimately, we wanted to strengthen interoperability across the country. In order to support us in ingesting this large number of implementation guides, we, of course, used LLMs. They really helped in authoring the large number of different resources that we had to cover, and they really accelerated our ability to develop not only good profiles, but also good value sets and good examples to go along with those. So we had a tooling pipeline where we had the FHIR IGs ingested into a gap analysis tool. We reviewed them with a private working group in an Excel spreadsheet format. So we actually took the profiles and flattened them for a little bit better comparison. And then we used the LLM to actually analyze some of the differences between the different profiles, like cardinalities, must support flags, other kinds of use of extensions, these kinds of things. And then we added additional content from external sources that didn't exist yet. And then we authored the profile using a pretty typical GitHub workflow, which eventually is now hosted on Simplifier. And I think if you were going to replicate this process, what you would need to do is define what your input data is, whether that's existing FHIR profiles, whether that's a spreadsheet, whatever it is. Prompt in sort of clear objectives to an LLM on how you want to break down what your FHIR profiles are going to be, and then ultimately generate your implementation guide. So I think now I'm going to shift basically into a lesson that we learned in terms of how to prompt for good outcomes here. And we found that being descriptive, being specific, and then being very small and sort of chunking your responses into, or chunking your prompts into really simple things was really effective. And in terms of being descriptive and sort of breaking things down, being vague yielded really terrible results, and being really specific and even getting down to the level of saying, like, I want this set of SNOMED codes in my profile from this value set, yielded much, much better results. So specifying your output format, mentioning your relevant data sources or codes, using an example if you have a pre-existing example of what you want your FHIR profile to look like, all helped us yield significantly better results when we were using FHIR shorthand to generate our profiles. Who's familiar with FHIR shorthand in the room? Okay, great. I don't need to talk about it. If you do want to learn more, there's a link in my presentation to a previous talk. And then, again, revisiting our tooling pipeline, this allowed us to generate new profiles. We converted them from the gap analysis tool, actually, to FHIR. So we actually used the input in the gap analysis tool to generate an initial set of JSON objects, structure definitions, convert those to FHIR, and then edit them based on the working group feedback. So I'll show you some examples of the kinds of things that we did. So we drafted our FHIR profiles in FHIR, And then using Cursor, we were able to very quickly make edits to those profiles. We were able to define rule sets. We weren't able to get really good performance in getting the LLMs to help us define the rule sets, but they were great at applying the rule sets in many different places. So we could write really simple prompts to do things like add rule sets and also fix mistakes in the fish files. One area where the LLMs were pretty terrible was actually fixing errors that were found in the fish console. So when you run sushi, you get a console log of errors. And Chris on chat.fire was much better at helping solve those errors than any LLM that we tried. On Simplifier also, we also used a lot of FHIR query language to define some of the references and some of the tables. And here, this was actually really effective at helping us define what those tables should be. And there are a lot of examples in our guide on how we used FQL. It often hallucinated, though, mixing in regular SQL syntax, which is kind of funny, but I would say fairly expected. We also were able to create a lot of value sets. We have, I would say, a fairly comprehensive set of value sets in this guide. And a lot of the value sets that we created were based on Excel spreadsheets that were given to us with example codes that we were provided. And then we were able to go directly from that spreadsheet into a FHIR value set very effectively. Again, here providing something like an example of what we wanted the value set to look like really improved the output. We're also then able to take that value set and then generate an example again, or an extension, again, using an example of what we wanted the extension to look like. And once again, performance here was pretty high. We didn't need to do a lot of editing, and we were able to put that file directly into some of the profiles that we were working on. Generating examples was honestly one of the areas I would say, the most fun in doing this work. It was really easy to create very comprehensive use cases and also figure out what sort of a longitudinal set of examples might look like. So we could create a very detailed set of examples using the support of Dr. GPT. And we were able to create multiple sets of example patients in this guide very, very quickly. And that really allowed for, a lot more comprehensive and sort of context within the IG around how to use some of the different profiles. I also think that one of the future experiments we're going to do is actually generating more comprehensive test data sets, because we were able to do pretty meaningful test generation here. We also found supplying the structure definitions was really essential to creating a good example. So without providing the profile and the structure definition for context, we weren't able to create a solid example with an LLM. And we also found that you really, really need to supply the code that you want in your example. LLMs out of the box have really poor performance. I would say, I've heard some people say something like 30% of the time they get the code right. I found it to be much lower personally. So actually saying use, this specific code for a atorvastatin, a drug, was much, much more effective. So we worked using this sort of framework around developing this guide with LLMs. And eventually we're going to be a little bit more coordinated in sort of how we release the guide and manage input from stakeholders and also feed that stakeholder input into the large language model so that we can actually generate more profiles and then be more comprehensive in our use cases. And one of the other things that we want to do in the future is also think about what sort of a better prompt might look like. So one of the big things that we found in researching prompting techniques is that starting with what they call a system level prompt from some of these applications is really effective at getting better outputs. So we're thinking about how we can apply those same principles to this process of IG authoring. And even though this wouldn't necessarily be like an application-specific thing, it would be something that you might, put into a little bot that you create or a little agent to help you create your profiles. But this can definitely help, we think, improve responses. So this is one on our roadmap to actually start testing, is, producing a prompt with, you are an IG authoring assistant or something like that. So some of our key lessons learned are that the easy stuff was really easy to fix. Complex logic was much harder for LLMs to work around, and providing clear examples helped improve performance there in terms of the outputs that we got. FQL performance was, I would say, so-so at best, but we managed to get some pretty good results once we provided some solid examples. And LLMs were really great at creating example FHIR resources that we wanted to add to the guide. Okay, thanks very much. And now we have time for questions.
Thank you, Alex. Can you talk a little bit on what methods did you use to test the accuracy of these LLM-generated data? Did you measure syntactic validity, or semantic correctness, or were you testing it from both perspectives?
We didn't really do that much of that kind of testing, since we were only generating examples and profiles. So we were able to validate that the profiles were in a correct fish format based on the sushi compiling. And then we were also able to validate that the examples have, a syntactical level of correctness, again, based on the sushi compiling.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. One request and then a question.
Sure.
One is, could you share this on our Monday call? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, sure.
And, the question is, on the prompts that you had, did you save them at all, or just thinking of people coming back and trying to recreate this work? As you do this going forward, both the prompts that you use and the conversations that you had with the AI agents would be useful learning, both for others that are doing prompt engineering and maybe ideally for the AI agents themselves.
Yeah, unfortunately, the closest thing I have to that right now, Carl, is this presentation. So hold tight, and then in the future, we're hoping that we can put together a GitHub repo or something that we can collaborate on, as a community with some of the best prompts for this kind of work.
Got about 5 more minutes if anyone else has questions.
Which models did you find that were most effective?
So I mainly used ChatGPT and Claude, and then I also used Cursor for some of the, what really is the IDE for the work. So I also used the prompts within Cursor. I did find Cursor was the most effective when I was doing anything related to editing fish, just because it had, I think, more context on what I was doing. And it was easier to also pass it context or specify what files I wanted it to get. For example generation, I found ChatGPT yielded the best results, but again, this is kind of anecdotal based on my own experience. But Claude was also pretty good.
Just to follow up on, you mentioned that when faced with compilation errors, that you found the models were ineffective at helping you resolve those errors. Did you make any progress? Can you just expand on where they failed, to what degree they failed? Was it a total flop? Was it sort of helpful? And basically, why did Chris have to become GPT for you, basically?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I'm not sure I fully know personally why these models didn't perform as well. I think part of it comes down to them honestly not having enough, I would say, context or training on how to answer some of these questions. I heard on a podcast recently, the models would rather hallucinate rather than give you a wrong answer. So, or say they don't know. So I found that was what they often produce there. And I just think it mainly comes down to them not having enough context on what a specific fish error needs, because when you think about it, it's such like a niche thing.
In creating examples, did you look at example scenario at all in terms of collecting a whole bunch of examples together in a timeline? And how much success, if any, did you have with that? Because if you did, I definitely want to spend time with you, because that's consumed so much of my time, because they're super valuable, but also super hard to create.
Is example scenario a resource, Lloyd? Yeah? Okay. I'm not familiar with that resource, so no. But maybe we could take that offline and try that out. Yeah.
Nice tip.
Thanks for talk. So 2 questions. First, do you think if you fine-tune an LLM model on existing IGs, fish codes, like the output JSONs, would help this model to work more effectively? And the second question is that you started with like a bunch of input IGs and you wanted to basically reconcile them. What if you want to create an IG from scratch? Could you just say that, you know what, I want a profile for observation with this specific properties or not?
Yeah, I think 2 parts to that question based on my experience. Yes, I think you could build some kind of agent to support you in this, and you could pass it, particular examples of good IG authorship that you want it to replicate. And I bet it would perform a lot better based on my experience, and then also giving it a really good system level prompt, which again is something that we want to experiment more with. I bet would also improve your results. At least that's our hypothesis. And if you wanted to start from scratch instead of like we did in our scenario where we were ingesting a large number of IGs, you absolutely could. I bet it would work great, but I would recommend providing it with some examples again of what you think a good profile looks like, and then getting it to build off that. Otherwise, what we found in our experience was that they hallucinated a lot without having that sort of grounding in something they could copy.
Any other questions? No? All right. Well, this is very cool. Thank you very much.